The strange thing about grief is that it can keep a person alive long after their heart has stopped believing in tomorrow. Every Sunday at exactly 9 in the morning, Damien Moretti walked through the iron gates of St. Gabriel Cemetery carrying fresh roses. It didn't matter if it was raining, snowing, or if the city itself seemed determined to keep moving without him. He always came. And every Sunday, I watched from a distance while the man who once ruled every room he entered stood quietly beside my grave. The first time I saw him do it, I almost stepped out from behind the oak trees and called his name. 3 years had passed since the day the world believed I died, but seeing him there nearly shattered the promise I had made to myself. Damien looked different now. Not older exactly, just heavier somehow, like he carried invisible weight on his shoulders that no amount of money or power could remove. His dark hair was slightly longer than I remembered. The sharp confidence that once lived in his posture had softened into something quieter, sadder. He stood in front of the white marble headstone and carefully placed the roses beneath my name. Claire Bennett, beloved daughter, beloved friend, gone too soon. I hated those words, not because they were unkind, but because they were wrong. I wasn't gone. I was standing less than 50 yards away, hidden beneath a gray coat and a borrowed life. The morning air smelled like wet grass and approaching rain. Clouds drifted low across the New York skyline beyond the cemetery walls, turning everything silver and muted. Damien slipped his hands into the pockets of his black overcoat and stared at the stone for a long time. He never spoke immediately. That was part of the ritual. First came silence. Then came memory. Then came regret. I knew the pattern because I had watched it every week for nearly 6 months. "I found that bakery you liked," he finally said. His voice carried softly across the distance. "The one in Brooklyn with the cinnamon rolls." My chest tightened. I remembered that bakery. I remembered laughing at him when he waited 40 minutes in line because he refused to let anyone else buy them for me. "You were right," he continued with a faint smile. "They were worth it." The smile disappeared almost instantly. That happened a lot now. Small flashes of the man I once loved followed by shadows that swallowed everything again. He lowered his gaze. "I should have listened to you." The words were barely audible. My fingers tightened around the edge of my coat. Because that was the part he never knew. The part nobody knew. He wasn't the reason I disappeared. He wasn't the reason I stayed away. But if Damien ever learned the truth, it wouldn't just destroy the fragile peace he had built from grief. It would drag both of us back into a past that nearly ruined everything. A cold wind moved through the cemetery. Damien looked up toward the gray sky. For a brief second, I thought his eyes found mine among the trees. My heartbeat stumbled. Then he turned away. He never saw me. He never knew I was there. And as he walked slowly toward the cemetery gates, I realized something that frightened me more than being found. After 3 years of hiding, I wasn't afraid of Damien Moretti anymore. I was afraid that I still loved him. The sound of church bells followed me all the way back to my apartment. For slow chimes carried across the city as if they were counting down the years I had lost. My apartment sat above a small bookstore in a quiet town nearly 200 miles from New York. Most people there knew me as Claire Harper, not Claire Bennett, not the woman whose name was carved into a marble headstone. Just Claire Harper, the woman who bought too many mystery novels and volunteered at the local animal shelter on weekends. It was a safe life, a simple life, the kind of life I had convinced myself I wanted. Yet every Sunday after seeing Damien, I returned home feeling less certain. Rain tapped softly against the windows as I climbed the narrow staircase to my apartment. The scent of old paper drifted up from the bookstore below. Normally it comforted me. Tonight it only made the silence feel heavier. I dropped my keys onto the kitchen counter and stared at the framed photograph sitting beside the coffee maker. It was the only picture I had allowed myself to keep. The image showed a younger version of me standing on the Brooklyn waterfront at sunset. My hair was blowing in the wind. I was smiling at someone outside the frame. At Damien. I remembered that day perfectly. He had spent 30 minutes trying to convince me that taking photographs was a waste of time because memories were enough. Then he secretly took dozens of pictures when he thought I was not looking. I picked up the frame and traced the edge with my thumb. 3 years. 3 years of hiding. 3 years of watching the man I loved mourn someone who was not actually gone. The guilt never became easier. A sharp knock on the door pulled me from the memory. My heart immediately accelerated. That reaction had never left me. Every unexpected sound still carried the possibility of discovery. I crossed the room carefully and looked through the peephole. Relief washed over me. It was only Emma. She owned the bookstore downstairs and had become the closest thing I had to family. The moment I opened the door, she held up a paper bag and smiled. "I brought pie," she announced. "You looked sad when you came home." I laughed despite myself. Is it that obvious? Only to people who care. Those words lingered long after she left. People who care. Damien had cared. He still cared. Every rose on that grave proved it. Hours later, I sat alone beside the window with the city lights glowing beyond the rain-streaked glass. Sleep refused to come. Around midnight, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I froze. Almost nobody had that number. The screen lit up. Unknown caller. My stomach tightened. Slowly, I answered. "Hello." For several seconds, there was only silence. Then a familiar male voice spoke softly into the darkness. A voice I had not heard in 3 years. "Claire," he said, "I know you are alive." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. Every sound inside the apartment disappeared beneath the pounding of my heartbeat. For a moment, I could not breathe. I could not move. I could not even convince myself that what I had just heard was real. Damien's voice had always carried a certain calm authority, but this was different. There was something underneath it now. Exhaustion. Hope. Fear. The kind of fear that only comes from wanting something too much. I lowered myself slowly into the chair beside the window. Rain continued to tap against the glass. "You have the wrong number," I whispered. The lie sounded weak even to me. Silence filled the line. Then a soft laugh came through the receiver. Not amused. Not happy. Just tired. "You always touch the necklace when you lie." My fingers immediately flew to my throat. The necklace. The silver pendant hidden beneath my sweater. The one thing I had never stopped wearing. My chest tightened. Damien. His name escaped before I could stop it. Another silence followed. Longer this time. More dangerous. "I knew it," he said quietly. I closed my eyes. 3 years of hiding. 3 years of new names, new cities, new routines. All undone by a single word. Outside, headlights passed through the rain and briefly illuminated the apartment walls. Everything suddenly felt fragile. Temporary. "How did you find me?" I asked. "I did not." His answer surprised me. "Not exactly." I waited. "Last week," he continued, "someone mailed a donation to the Children's Hospital Foundation in Brooklyn." My stomach dropped. I already knew where this was going. Every Christmas since disappearing, I had anonymously donated to the pediatric wing where I once volunteered. It was the only tradition I could not abandon. The envelope had no return address, Damien said, but the handwriting looked familiar. I pressed my hand against my forehead. Such a small mistake. Such a human mistake. I compared it to an old birthday card you gave me. The confession sounded almost embarrassing coming from a man like him. Then I spent 6 months following possibilities. 6 months. The number landed heavily. 6 months searching for a ghost. 6 months chasing a woman the world believed was buried beneath white marble. "You should not have done that." I know. His honesty caught me off guard. But I could not stop. I looked toward the framed photograph on the counter. Toward the life I had built from borrowed pieces. "Damien, things are different now." Different does not mean over. The words settled between us. Heavy. Familiar. Dangerous. I remembered another rainy night years ago when he had said almost the same thing after our first argument. Back then it had made me smile. Tonight it only made my heart ache. "Why are you calling?" I finally asked. For several seconds I thought he might not answer. Then his voice returned, softer than before. "Because every Sunday I stand beside your grave and tell you things I wish you could hear." My eyes filled with tears. "And tonight," he said, "for the first time in 3 years, I know you are listening." After the call ended, I sat awake until sunrise. The rain eventually stopped, but the knot in my chest remained. Every few minutes, I found myself staring at the phone on the coffee table as if it might ring again. It never did. Damien had always understood timing. When we first met, it was one of the things that fascinated me about him. He never rushed conversations, never demanded answers before someone was ready to give them. Most people saw power when they looked at him. I saw patience, and somehow that made him even more dangerous. Monday morning arrived wrapped in pale sunlight and cold air. I followed my normal routine because routine felt safer than thinking. I opened the animal shelter at 8, fed the cats, walked 2 elderly dogs around the fenced yard. smiled when visitors stopped by looking for companions. From the outside, nothing appeared different. Inside, everything had changed. Every passing car made me glance toward the road. Every unfamiliar face made my pulse quicken. By noon, I was reorganizing paperwork for the third time when Emma appeared carrying 2 cups of coffee. She studied me for several seconds before setting 1 cup beside me. "You look like you have not slept." I forced a smile. Maybe I have been reading too much. Or maybe something happened. Her voice was gentle. That made it harder. Emma deserved honesty. But honesty was the one thing I could never give. Not completely. "Do you ever feel like your past is catching up with you?" I asked. She laughed softly. "Every person over 30 feels that way." I managed a real smile at that. Yet her answer stayed with me long after she left. My past was not catching up. It had already arrived. That evening, I locked the shelter and started the half-mile walk home. The town looked peaceful beneath the golden glow of streetlights. Families filled the sidewalks. A couple sat outside the diner, sharing a slice of pie. Somewhere nearby, someone was playing old country music. Ordinary. Safe. Everything I had once dreamed about. Then I saw the black sedan. It was parked across the street from the bookstore. Clean. Expensive. Out of place. My steps slowed immediately. A man stood beside the vehicle wearing a charcoal overcoat. Not Damien. Younger. Tall. Dark hair. Familiar. My stomach dropped before I even recognized him. Luca Romano. Damien's closest friend for more than a decade. The man who had once helped us move furniture into my first apartment. The man who knew exactly how much sugar I put in my coffee. Luca spotted me inside. Not relieved. Not surprised. Just tired. "Claire." Hearing my real name spoken aloud felt strange. Dangerous. I stopped several feet away. "How did you find me?" He glanced toward the bookstore window. "The same way Damien did." I folded my arms tightly across my chest. "Then why are you here?" Luca looked at me for a long moment before answering. The evening breeze stirred fallen leaves across the sidewalk between us. "Because Damien is not the only person who spent 3 years looking for you." The evening air suddenly felt colder. Cars rolled past on the street behind Luca, their headlights reflecting across the wet pavement, but everything else seemed distant. Muted. I stared at him, searching for signs that this was some kind of mistake. It was not. The expression on his face told me that much. Luca had always been impossible to read for strangers, but I had known him long enough to recognize concern when I saw it. "Why?" I asked quietly. "Why would you spend 3 years looking for someone who wanted to disappear?" He glanced away for a moment. "Because people do not vanish without a reason." I swallowed hard. "Sometimes they do. Not you." The certainty in his voice unsettled me. We stood there beneath the bookstore sign, while a light breeze carried the scent of rain through the street. I remembered Sunday afternoons years ago when Luca would stop by our apartment unannounced, bringing coffee and terrible advice. He had always acted like an older brother. Protective, observant, annoyingly persistent. Apparently some things never changed. "Does Damien know you are here?" I asked. Luca nodded. "He knows I came." My heart tightened immediately. And he told me not to pressure you." That surprised me. "Then why are you here?" Luca sighed. "Because there are things you deserve to know." The words settled heavily between us. I looked toward the apartment above the bookstore. A warm light glowed from my kitchen window. Safe. Familiar. Yet suddenly it felt very far away. "What things?" Luca hesitated. For the first time since arriving, he seemed unsure of himself. "Claire, after you disappeared, Damien changed." I almost laughed. Of course he changed. Anyone would. But something in Luca's expression stopped me. "You think I do not know that?" I asked. I watched him stand beside my grave every week. Luca froze. "You watched him?" The realization crossed his face instantly. "That is why you kept returning to New York." I said nothing. I did not need to. He already understood. Luca shook his head slowly. "You still love him." The statement landed with uncomfortable accuracy. I looked away. Across the street, a young couple stepped out of a restaurant laughing about something neither of them would remember tomorrow. Ordinary happiness. The kind people never appreciated until it became impossible. "Love was never the problem," I said softly. Luca studied me for several seconds. "Then what was?" I closed my eyes. The answer waited there like a locked door I had spent years refusing to open. Fear. Not fear of Damien. Fear of what the truth would do to him. Fear of what it would force him to become. Fear of the promise I made the night I disappeared. I cannot tell you, I whispered. Luca nodded slowly as though he had expected that answer. Then he reached into his coat pocket and handed me a small envelope. My stomach tightened immediately. What is this? Something Damien wanted you to have. The paper felt strangely heavy in my hands. What is inside? Luca looked toward the darkening sky. A letter. He paused. One he wrote 3 years ago and never stopped carrying. The envelope remained unopened for nearly an hour. I carried it upstairs, set it on the kitchen table, then walked away from it 3 separate times. Outside, darkness settled over the town while the bookstore below prepared to close for the night. The familiar sounds usually comforted me. The turning of locks, the soft scrape of chairs, Emma humming to herself while organizing shelves. Tonight none of it helped. My eyes kept drifting back to the envelope. Damien's handwriting was unmistakable. Clean, precise, familiar enough to make my chest ache. Finally, sometime after 10 o'clock, I sat down and carefully broke the seal. A single folded sheet of paper rested inside. The paper itself looked worn from years of being carried. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. Claire, if you are reading this, then something impossible has happened. The words immediately blurred behind a film of tears. I blinked hard and continued. I do not know where you are. I do not know if you are safe. I do not know if I will ever see you again. But there is something I need you to know. I stopped reading for a moment and pressed a hand against my chest. The apartment suddenly felt too quiet, too small. Outside, a passing car moved through the darkness beyond the window. I forced myself to continue. The worst part is not losing you. The worst part is knowing there were things I never said because I thought I had more time. My throat tightened. That had always been Damien's weakness. He planned for tomorrow as if tomorrow was guaranteed. He believed there would always be another conversation, another dinner, another chance to explain himself. The letter continued. You once told me that people spend their lives collecting things they cannot take with them. Money, status, power. I argued with you for 2 hours because I thought you were wrong. You were not. The only thing that ever mattered was sitting across from you while you laughed at my terrible coffee. A tear slipped down my cheek. I wiped it away and kept reading. If somehow you are alive, then I want you to know this. I do not need answers. I do not need explanations. I only need to know that somewhere in this world you are still smiling. The room seemed to tilt around me. I lowered the paper and stared at the wall for several seconds. Damien had written those words 3 years ago, long before he knew I was alive, long before he believed there was any chance of hearing my voice again. A soft knock startled me. I quickly folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. Claire, Emma called through the door. Are you awake? I opened it a moment later. She took one look at my face and immediately frowned. What happened? I tried to answer. Instead, my gaze drifted toward the envelope resting on the table. Emma followed my eyes. Her expression softened. Someone found you, did they not? I nodded. Silence stretched between us. Then she asked the one question I had spent 3 years avoiding. And now that he knows where you are, what are you going to do? After Emma left, I remained at the kitchen table long after midnight. The envelope sat beside me like a heartbeat I could not ignore. Outside, the town slept beneath a blanket of silence while the streetlights painted soft pools of gold across the empty sidewalks. 3 years ago, I had convinced myself that leaving was an act of mercy. Every day since then, I had repeated that belief like a prayer. Yet now, sitting alone with Damien's letter still fresh in my mind, certainty felt harder to find. The next morning arrived gray and cold. Low clouds drifted across the sky, threatening rain. I spent the day shelving donated books in the bookstore because keeping my hands busy felt easier than confronting the questions waiting inside my head. Around noon, Emma appeared carrying a box of paperbacks. She set it on the counter and studied me carefully. You have made a decision, she said. I looked up in surprise. How do you know? A small smile touched her lips. Because you look terrified. I laughed despite myself. She was right. Fear had a way of revealing itself. Not through panic. Through stillness. Through the moment before a person finally steps forward. That evening I walked to the edge of town where a small lake reflected the fading colors of sunset. It had become my favorite place during the years I spent hiding. The water always seemed honest. Calm on the surface. Deep underneath. I sat on an old wooden bench and watched the ripples move across the lake. My phone rested in my coat pocket. Heavy. Waiting. I knew Damien would answer if I called. I knew he would probably answer before the first ring finished. The thought alone made my chest tighten. Memories drifted through my mind. Sunday mornings, drinking coffee together. Long conversations that stretched past midnight. The way he always pretended not to care about holidays, and then somehow remembered every important date. The way he looked at me when he thought I was not paying attention. I had spent years trying to bury those memories. Instead, they had quietly followed me everywhere. A cold breeze swept across the water. My phone suddenly vibrated. I froze. For a brief second, I thought it might be Damien. It was not. The caller ID showed Luca. I answered immediately. What happened? Silence lingered on the line. Then Luca exhaled slowly. I need you to stay calm. My stomach dropped. Luca, Damien left New York this morning. The words struck me harder than they should have. What do you mean? I mean he is driving north. Every sound around me seemed to disappear. The lake, the wind, the distant traffic. Gone. How far north? I whispered. Luca hesitated. That hesitation told me everything before he even spoke. Claire, he said carefully. If he keeps going, he will be in your town before sunrise. Sleep never came. I spent the entire night pacing across the apartment while the clock on the wall seemed determined to move as slowly as possible. Every passing hour brought Damien closer. By 2 a.m, rain had started again. Soft at first, then steady. The sound filled the silence between my thoughts. I stood beside the window watching water streak down the glass and tried to imagine what I would say if he actually appeared. 3 years of silence could not be repaired with a single conversation. 3 years of unanswered questions could not fit into a few sentences. Yet none of that stopped my heart from racing every time headlights appeared on the street below. Around 4:30, exhaustion finally forced me onto the couch. I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, sunlight was filtering through the curtains. Pale gold. Quiet. Ordinary. For a few seconds I forgot everything. Then memory returned all at once. Damien. The phone call. Luca's warning. I sat upright and reached for my phone. No messages. No missed calls. Nothing. The absence of news somehow felt worse. I showered, dressed, and went downstairs earlier than usual. Emma was already opening the bookstore. She took one look at me and handed over a cup of coffee without speaking. I accepted it gratefully. You look nervous, she finally said. I stared into the cup. I am. She nodded as though that answer made perfect sense. Then maybe it is time to stop running. Her words followed me throughout the morning. Stop running. It sounded simple when someone else said it. By noon, I had convinced myself that Luca must have been mistaken. Maybe Damien changed his mind. Maybe he turned around. Maybe he realized that reopening old wounds would help no one. I was shelving books near the front window when a black SUV rolled slowly down Main Street. My breath caught instantly. The vehicle was familiar, not because I had seen that exact one before, but because it belonged to a world I recognized. Expensive, controlled, deliberate. The SUV continued past the bookstore and disappeared around the corner. I told myself it meant nothing. Then another one appeared 10 minutes later. My stomach tightened. Emma noticed my expression. Friends of yours? She asked lightly. No, the answer came too quickly. Outside, clouds gathered again, dimming the afternoon light. The bookstore bell chimed as customers came and went. I tried to focus on work. Tried to focus on anything else. Then, shortly after 3 o'clock, the bell rang once more. I looked up automatically. The world seemed to stop. A tall man stood just inside the doorway. Dark hair. Black overcoat. Rain clinging to his shoulders from the storm outside. He looked older than the last time I had seen him up close. Not because of age. Because of grief. Our eyes met across the bookstore. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. And in that impossible, silent moment, I realized something terrifying. For 3 years I had imagined what it would feel like to see Damien Moretti again. I had been wrong every single time. For several seconds neither of us spoke. The bookstore around us continued exactly as before. A customer browsed the history section. Soft music played from hidden speakers. Rain tapped gently against the front windows. Yet it felt as though the entire world had narrowed to the few feet separating me from Damien. His eyes never left mine. They were the same deep green the first remembered, but there was something new in them now. Something quieter. The sharp certainty that once defined him had been replaced by caution, as if he was afraid one wrong movement might make me disappear again. I realized I was gripping a book so tightly that my fingers hurt. Slowly, I set it back on the shelf. Damien took one step forward, then stopped. Even that small movement seemed carefully considered. "Hi, Claire." His voice was softer than I had ever heard it. Not because he lacked confidence. Because he cared about the answer. My throat tightened. Thousands of words had lived inside my head for 3 years. None of them appeared when I needed them. "Hi." The simple reply barely sounded like my voice. A faint smile touched his face. Not happiness. Relief. Like a man finally reaching shore after years spent drifting at sea. Neither of us knew what came next. That surprised me. Damien always knew what came next. He planned, calculated, solved problems before they appeared. Yet standing there, he looked as uncertain as I felt. "You cut your hair," he said quietly. I almost laughed. Of all the things he could have said, that was what he noticed first. 3 years is a long time. It is. His gaze softened. "It looks good." The compliment hit harder than it should have. Across the room, Emma appeared from behind a bookshelf. She took one look at us and immediately understood. Without saying a word, she guided the remaining customers toward another section of the store. Bless her for that. Damien glanced around the bookstore. "This is where you have been." I nodded. For most of it, he absorbed that information silently. I wondered what he saw when he looked around. The worn wooden shelves. The handwritten staff recommendations. The comfortable chairs beside the reading corner. A simple life. A normal life. The kind of life he had always believed I deserved. "You seem happy here," he said. The question hidden beneath those words was impossible to miss. "Are you happier without me?" I looked away toward the rain-streaked windows. Sometimes. The honesty surprised both of us. Damien lowered his gaze briefly. Then he nodded. "That is fair." We stood in silence again. Not awkward. Just fragile. Like two people learning a language they once spoke fluently. Finally, he reached into his coat pocket and removed a folded photograph. My heart immediately recognized it before my eyes did. It was the picture from the Brooklyn waterfront. The same one sitting in a frame upstairs. The edges were worn from being handled too often. Damien looked down at it for a moment. "I carried this every day," he said quietly. Then he met my eyes again. Because some part of me never believed goodbye was the end. The photograph remained between us like a bridge neither of us knew how to cross. I stared at the worn edges, at the faded colors, at the version of myself who had smiled so easily back then. It felt like looking at a stranger. 3 years changes a person. Grief changes a person. Hiding changes a person. Damien carefully folded the picture and returned it to his pocket. The movement was small, almost protective, as if even now he was afraid of losing it. Or losing me. Outside, rain continued to fall in soft sheets against the bookstore windows. The gray afternoon light painted everything in muted colors. Somewhere near the back of the store, Emma was deliberately giving us privacy. I silently thanked her for that. "I imagined this moment 1,000 times," Damien said quietly. "None of the versions looked like this." I managed a faint smile. "What did they look like?" He glanced toward the floor. "Usually you were angry." "That seems reasonable." A small laugh escaped him. The sound startled me. Not because it was unfamiliar. Because it was familiar. For a second it felt like no time had passed at all. Then reality returned. 3 years. An empty grave. A borrowed life. Too much history standing between us. Damien studied me carefully. "Are you angry?" The question hung in the air. I thought about it honestly. The answer surprised me. No, his expression shifted slightly. "No." I shook my head. Confused. Hurt. Tired. But not angry. The truth was more complicated than anger. Anger burns hot. What I carried felt older than that. Sadder. "Then why did you leave?" There it was. The question we had both been avoiding. My chest tightened immediately. Damien noticed. Of course he did. He always noticed. "Claire." His voice softened. "You do not have to answer today." Relief washed through me so quickly it almost hurt. He was giving me an escape. A choice. 3 years ago, I would have expected demands. Explanations. Persistence. The man standing before me now seemed different. Quieter. More patient. Loss had changed him. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded once. Then his gaze drifted around the bookstore again. "You built a life." I tried. "And are you happy?" The question sounded simple. It was not. I looked toward the front window where raindrops slid slowly down the glass. Happiness. Such a fragile word. Some days. Damien accepted the answer without argument. That alone told me how much he had changed. The old Damien would have challenged it, investigated it, refused to settle for uncertainty. This Damien simply understood. Silence settled between us again. Comfortable this time. Then his phone vibrated. The sound seemed unusually loud. Damien glanced at the screen. Something unreadable crossed his face. Not fear. Not concern. Recognition. He silenced the call immediately. Everything okay? I asked. His eyes returned to mine. It can wait. My stomach tightened. Because for the first time since seeing him again, I realized something important. Damien had come here alone. He had left his entire world behind. And whatever was waiting for him on the other end of that phone call had followed him all the way to my town. The rest of the afternoon passed in a strange blur. Damien stayed until the bookstore closed. We talked about small things because the larger things felt too fragile to touch. He asked about the town. I asked about New York. We discussed books, weather, coffee, and 100 subjects that existed safely outside the space where our real questions waited. By the time Emma locked the front door, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened beneath the evening lights. Damien stood beside me on the sidewalk while the last traces of daylight disappeared beyond the horizon. I booked a room at the inn near the lake, he said. I nodded. That is probably a good idea. A faint smile appeared. Probably. Neither of us moved. Neither of us seemed eager to end the conversation. Eventually, Damien glanced toward the dark street. Would you like to walk? The invitation was simple, gentle, free of expectation. I surprised myself by saying yes. We followed the quiet sidewalks toward the lake. The air smelled fresh after the rain. Water droplets clung to tree branches and reflected the glow of nearby streetlights. For several minutes, we walked in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who already know each other too well. Luca told me you have been volunteering at the shelter, Damien said. You talked to Luca? More than I wanted to. A small laugh escaped me. That sounds familiar. Damien smiled. Some things never change. The lake appeared ahead of us, calm and dark beneath the night sky. We stopped near the same wooden bench where I had spoken to Luca only days earlier. The memory felt distant now. Everything before Damien arrived suddenly seemed farther away than 3 years. He looked out across the water. I used to come to places like this when I was younger. I turned toward him. You did. Before everything became complicated. His answer carried a sadness that made my chest tighten. Damien rested his hands in his coat pockets. Do you know what surprised me most when I found out you were alive? I shook my head. I was not angry. That answer caught me off guard. You were not. No, he stared at the dark water. I was grateful. The honesty in his voice left no room for doubt. 3 years ago, I would have traded anything just to know you were still somewhere beneath the same sky. I looked away before he could see the tears forming in my eyes. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then headlights appeared across the road. A black sedan slowed near the entrance to the park before continuing past us. Damien noticed it immediately. So did I. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not fear. Awareness. The same awareness I had seen years ago whenever something demanded his attention. My stomach tightened. Is something wrong? I asked quietly. Damien watched the disappearing taillights for a second before answering. Maybe nothing. The words sounded calm. Too calm. Then he looked back at me and forced a small smile. But for the first time since finding me, I realized there was still something he had not told me. We remained by the lake until the night grew cold enough to send ripples across the water. Damien walked me back toward the bookstore, but the conversation never fully recovered from the moment that black sedan appeared. Something had changed. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. Damien was present beside me, yet part of his attention seemed fixed somewhere else. Watching, listening, calculating. The old instincts had returned. When we reached the bookstore, he stopped beneath the awning and looked up at the apartment window glowing above us. You should get some rest, he said. You sound like someone who has not slept in days. A faint smile appeared. That is because I have not. The smile faded quickly. Claire. The way he said my name made my chest tighten. What? For a moment he seemed uncertain. Then he looked away. Nothing. I knew that was not true. But I also knew pushing him would accomplish nothing. Damien had always shared difficult truths on his own schedule. Good night, I said softly. Good night. I watched him walk away through the quiet street until he disappeared around the corner. The moment he was gone, unease settled heavily in my stomach. By midnight, I was still awake. Rain had returned again, tapping lightly against the windows while shadows moved across the ceiling. I kept thinking about the sedan, about the phone call he ignored, about the expression that crossed his face whenever he thought I was not looking. Something was wrong. Around 1 in the morning, my phone rang. I grabbed it immediately. Luca. Claire. His voice sounded tense. Is Damien with you? I sat upright. No. What? Silence. Then a slow exhale. Because nobody can reach him. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? I mean his phone is off. His driver does not know where he is. Nobody has seen him for hours. I swung my legs off the bed. Luca, what is going on? Another pause followed. Longer this time. There is something Damien never told you. My heart sank. What? Rain intensified against the windows. The sound filled the apartment. 3 years ago, Lucas said quietly, the day everyone believed you died, Damien made a choice. I froze. The words hit something buried deep inside me. A memory. A promise. A sacrifice. What kind of choice? My voice barely sounded human. Luca answered with painful honesty. The kind that cost him everything. I closed my eyes. Because suddenly I understood why Damien never seemed angry. Why he spent years visiting a grave. Why grief had carved itself into every part of him. There was a truth hidden beneath those missing years. A truth neither of us had been brave enough to face. Then Luca spoke again. Claire, if you do not know the whole story, then you never really knew why he let you go. The rest of the night passed in fragments. Rain against the windows. Luca's words echoing through my mind. The kind that cost him everything. I sat alone in the darkness until dawn painted the horizon pale gray. Then, just after 6 in the morning, there was a knock at my door. Not loud. Not urgent. 3 steady taps. My heart knew who it was before my feet touched the floor. When I opened the door, Damien stood there wearing the same black coat from the day before. His hair was damp from the morning mist. His eyes looked tired. But for the first time since finding me, they also looked peaceful. Neither of us spoke immediately. The sunrise behind him bathed the empty street in soft gold light. Finally, I stepped aside. Come in. He entered quietly. The apartment suddenly felt too small for all the things we had left unsaid. Damien looked around the room before turning toward me. Luca called you. It was not a question. I nodded. He told me there was something I never knew. Damien lowered his gaze briefly. Then he sat at the kitchen table. For a moment, he seemed to gather himself. 3 years ago, he began, I learned something that changed everything. I sat across from him. The same table where I had read his letter. The same table where I had spent years convincing myself that leaving had been the right choice. What did you learn? His eyes met mine. That you left to protect me. The words stole my breath. He continued before I could respond. I did not understand it then. I only understood that you were gone. He looked toward the window where morning light spilled across the floor. For a long time I blamed myself. Then I blamed fate. Then I stopped blaming anyone because none of it brought you back. Silence settled between us. Not painful. Honest. Why did you never come looking sooner? I asked quietly. A sad smile touched his face. Because eventually I realized something. My chest tightened. What? He leaned back slightly. Love is not possession. The answer surprised me. Damien noticed. 3 years ago, I would have crossed any distance to find you. His voice softened. But grief taught me that loving someone sometimes means respecting the choice they made, even when it breaks your heart. Tears filled my eyes. Not because of what he said, because I believed him. Somewhere during the years we spent apart, the man who once tried to control every outcome had learned how to let go. The room fell silent again. Then Damien reached into his coat pocket and removed a small velvet box. My breath caught immediately. He set it on the table between us, but made no move to open it. I bought this years ago, he said quietly, and I carried it for 3 years because I never knew what else to do with it. Neither of us touched the box. We simply looked at each other across the table while sunlight slowly filled the room. Then I realized the truth that had followed us through every mile, every year, every goodbye. We were no longer the people who had lost each other. We were the people who had survived it. And for the first time in a very long time, tomorrow did not feel like something to fear.